Chapter 19. Alice and Elspeth arrived not a moment too soon at the basement apartment in the Sovereign Hotel that same afternoon. They found that Jean Noel burning up with fever as he lay drenched in sweat and glassy-eyed on the disheveled sofa bed, beneath which the cats had been hiding and emitting worrisome yowls of despair. As if this scenario alone was not cause enough for concern, Jean Noel seemed to be in a hallucinatory state that occasioned him to tremble in fear, while babbling incoherently on and on that the king of cats was dead, or words to that effect. Failing to recognize either Alice or Elspeth as they awkwardly bundled him up into his slippers and red corduroy bathrobe with great difficulty, whisked him off to the emergency room at the Santa Monica Hospital. He all the while continued to sadly bemoan the tragic death of the king of the cats. It was a troubling ordeal to say the least, and 6 hours later Elspeth was only too relieved to find herself sitting in front of a merrily burning little Duralog with a Danish butter cookie from the gift shop, of split pea Andersons of Buellton in hand, along with a civilized cup of tea in which to dunk it. Earlier, Elspeth had called from the hospital to inform Gwen that she was not to be expected home for dinner. She and Alice would just grab quick bowls of soup at the hospital cafeteria as they stood by anxiously waiting the news of Jean Noel's prognosis. It was actually over fragrant bowls of mulligatawny several hours later that the ER doctor found them and sat down to explain Jean Noel's tenuous situation. The upshot of it all was that Jean Noel would indeed be admitted to the hospital that evening, and that he should have no further visitors for the rest of the night. Alice had already called Siddhartha, who was on schedule to pick up Zuzu at the airport late that evening, when she arrived on the red-eye from Paris. Zuzu would be staying with him at his penthouse apartment in the Barrington Plaza for the next 3 nights before returning home to Paris almost indefinitely. It seemed that she had booked a bereavement flight at a reasonable rate on Air France, that she had come with certain non-refundable travel restrictions. If her return site seemed to be, let it be said, in undue haste, it might be attributed to that. However, the fact that Henri, severely debilitated by the news of the untimely death of their only child, was far too ill to travel. Zuzu herself, therefore desirous of a hasty return to his side. After a good night's sleep that evening, Siddhartha would bring her to the hospital to visit Jean Noel on the following day. When the ER doctor recommended that Alice and Elspeth both go home and get much-needed sleep for themselves, Alice drove her friend back to Villa Mallorca, where she then dropped off at Gwen and Peter's doorstep. It was with decidedly flagging spirits that she made the return trip to the basement apartment in the Sovereign Hotel, dragged herself through the front door, and somehow managed to coax the worried cats out from under the sofa bed. Giving them their dinners, she herself required no such coaching from Morpheus, as she more than willingly sank forgetfully into his warm and reassuring arms. Elspeth, meanwhile, was rallied considerably by the warm and reassuring presence of her friends. Seated contentedly in front of the dancing fire, she attempted to recapitulate for the benefit of Gwen and Peter and Christie all the events of that turbulent afternoon, and in particular the disturbing condition in which Jean Noel had been found. When we left him at the hospital, he still had all the same symptoms: the raging fever, incoherent babbling, and horrible hallucinations. The doctor said he's what's known as a classic UFO case. Elspeth said uneasily as she stroked Bartholomew, who had leapt into her lap and began to purr. UFO case? Peter said in mild amusement. They aren't actually suggesting he was abducted by aliens, are they? I think what Ellie meant to say, Christie, O'Keefe interjected helpfully, that he's a classic FUO case, not UFO. It's a common error, darling, he said, nodding knowingly in Elspeth's direction. What it means is that the boy's got himself a classic fever of unidentified origin. Dang, if I didn't see a lot of that in the medical corps during the war. More'n it's likely brought on by trauma, but they always got to be sure it ain't on account of something else even worse. The memorial service is the day after tomorrow. Elspeth gasped, as if only remembering the actual purpose of their trip. Will he be even able to go? That boy won't be going to no funeral any time soon, I'm afraid, Christy answered definitely. What could have possibly brought something like that on so suddenly? Gwen wondered aloud. Was it the voice he heard at sea, she uncertainly proposed, hazarding only the intelligent guess that she could think of? That could have had something to do with it, Christy agreed, but only half-heartedly, his mind drifting back in time, well over 20 years ago, in fact. There he remembered a little baby he had delivered in the goat house in Big Sur, and all that the child had never been told in the interim.